Is it time to dismantle some doctrines? If you don't know what that means, then come along with me. I'm Dr. Clint Haycock, a former evangelical Bible college teacher and pastor of more than 20 years. Join me as we deconstruct whatever dogmas and beliefs have held you behind, and together work to reconstruct and rebuild your authentic self. I'm happy to welcome back returning guest Tia Levings. We're going to be talking about her new book that's coming out just in a month, I think, or so, month or two. It is called I Belong to Me, A Survivor's Guide to Recovery and Hope After Religious Trauma. So welcome back, Tia, to the show.
Thanks so much. I'm glad to talk again.
Yeah, last time we talked, we had a strange issue. I had an issue. My webcam wouldn't work.
Yeah.
It was really awkward because you were so good. You couldn't see me or something like that. I could see you, but you couldn't see me. So
in our defense, it's over an ocean. You know, you're UK, I'm the States. So we're figuring it out.
We're figuring it out. Yeah. I've just set up now because I've just moved in with my girlfriend. It's a long time coming, but this is the first podcast from Lancaster in England. So I was in North Wales for years and years and years, but I just moved up here literally a couple of days ago. So this is a new setup for me in her office now. So hopefully everything will be okay.
Yeah. We'll test drive it.
Yeah. So we talked before about your book, A Well-Trained Wife. And I'm thinking a lot of people will probably know you, obviously, from that book. Before we get into your new book, which is fascinating. I mean, the topic alone, the title, religious trauma, that's right up my street.
Yeah.
I'm definitely a survivor of religious trauma syndrome. And we have a lot to talk about because I was raised in the Bill Gothard cult as well. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, lots to talk about. But maybe you could give us a sort of an overview, because from what I understand, this new book dovetails in with your first book. Is that kind of the way I see it? Am I reading that right?
Yeah. In one level, it does. It is a follow-up because it's my recovery and the things that I did in order to recover from that story and that experience. But it's also much broader than that. And it's the kind of book that I'd love to put in anyone's hands that's leaving anything that has been in any kind of high control, toxic dynamic, from a relationship to a room to a cult. The steps are remarkably similar. And this is a user's, layperson's conversation. It's not an academic book, and it's not high on statistics for technical, reading modalities, like healing modalities and things that are, really above my pay grade. This is what I did in order to put myself back together. A Well-Trained Wife, it covers extensive domestic abuse and high control patriarchy. And a lot of times people will assume that the hardest part of recovery was dealing with the violence and the traumatic experiences that I had. And to some extent, that was, obviously very grueling. There was an underlayer that was much harder, which was redeveloping a sense of self, because religion, high control religion, indoctrinates you instead of allowing you to develop into an autonomous adult with agency. And I had to give that to myself in adulthood. So while A Well-Trained Wife is like a later in life coming of age story, it's how I stepped into my power, broke myself free, got my kids out of abuse. I Belong to Me is how I put myself back together and rebuilt, which is applicable to anyone living under the influence of Christian fundamentalism. And unfortunately, that's everyone right now because of the way the world governments are going.
Certainly in the United States.
That's right.
Here in the UK, it's not so bad. But I mean, we can see the effects of Christian nationalism obviously writ large in the new Trump administration. My British friends are always asking me, what the hell is going on?
That's important because your British friends are the mission field for the same groups. There's definitely an outreach to the UK and to Europe and Australia.
It's true. Yeah. Something Catherine Stewart talks about in her book, Money, Lies, and God. She was visiting the UK and she was in London talking about this. And there's one of the chapters in her book. And, these American evangelicals are starting to come over here now to the UK, as you say.
Yeah.
They're viewing it as a mission field. And they're trying to export this sort of Christian nationalist patriarchal message that you and I grew up with. I don't know if I suffered maybe as much as you did. And that's something I wanted to talk to you about, because reading the description of you, the author of these two books, you were raised in a very abusive and controlling environment. Maybe for those who don't understand, could you take us through what you were raised in? And then obviously it reflected into your marriage, didn't it?
Yeah, well, and actually my upbringing is kind of important to the story because it didn't seem like that as an insider. And it won't look that way to many outsiders either. My upbringing was different at home than it was at church. My parents were very loving, caring entrepreneurs, craftspeople. I grew up in a very creative environment, always knew that, I was loved and that God was important, church was important. And when we moved to Florida from Michigan when I was 10, and that was a major cultural shift for me as a person, but also as a family. And they took us to this mega church downtown, and it looked everything that white evangelicism tries to sell today. It was wealthy, it was white, it was fun. They had a lot of uplifting, wonderful things to say about God. They also had a lot of hellfire, brimstone, high control, outright Christian dominionism, patriotism that was moving towards nationalism. And it was becoming more fundamentalist as I grew up. So what that looked like was really living what it means to be gaslit on a daily basis, because I thought we had the right way. I thought I had a good childhood with lots of good experiences that made me happy. And it wasn't until years later, when I've escaped the abuse that happened in my marriage, that I was able to back trace the decisions that I made, why I made them, what formed me, what shaped me into this person who would marry someone I barely knew and think it's God's will, that would stay in abuse and feel and know that a divorce was worse than death, that would move in this devotion, this holy devotion. My husband was very, very devout. What groomed me for all of that was this childhood at church. So I take definitely a different look at it now than I did then, because this is an important thing. Anyone familiar with Christian theology will know that we are allowed to judge. We are supposed to judge when you are examining the fruit of something. And the fruit of the Christian fundamentalism that I grew up in is people who are groomed for abuse. They're groomed for a narcissistic God. They're groomed for cooperation and labor forces so that the small elite men in charge can lead everything and everyone else follows. So the fruit's really rotten, and that's what survivor stories are to me. And that's why I think there's so much power in us talking about what happened to us.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was the air we breathed, the water we were swimming in.
That's right.
It's no accident that Jeffrey Epstein was quoting from Dr. James Dobson.
Right? And we were not surprised. We were not surprised. I knew that when people were saying Dobson's going to show up in the Epstein files, I knew that wouldn't happen like as him as a participant in the island or the ranches or anything like that. I knew that it would come in through some sort of influence, because that model of patriarchy already has a lot of pedophilia in it. It already has a lot of sexual grooming through purity culture. There was no surprise. And what it does is it grooms everybody to obey. So when you want an abuse victim to obey their abuser, you pull someone like James Dobson, who beat dogs, who shut children out, who, destroyed homes and parental relationships with their kids. There's stories in his books that are very similar to everything we've seen in the files. Like, it wasn't a surprise at all. It was disheartening because I knew it wouldn't make a difference for the people who love Dobson, but it wasn't surprising.
Absolutely. He was lionized when he died.
Yeah.
Was it about a year ago?
It was. I was at a writer's camp. Yes, I was a writer. It was a bizarre experience the day I heard he died. I was in the woods in Wisconsin with some writers, and someone had a phone and they announced it. And I completely broke open and fell on the ground sobbing. And I had no warning that response was coming. It felt like this great evil had left the earth. It was finally at least that's one less that we have to worry about. And actually fell into the arms of someone I didn't know very well. She turned out to be a trauma therapist. And she's like, I saw your face before you fell, and I knew you were going to need me to catch you. And she caught me. And it was a beautiful experience. I will never forget the day Dobson died.
It's huge. I can remember that. And yet he was eulogized and lionized by all these evangelicals. What a wonderful man. He did so much for so many people, families, marriages, child rearing. And another big name, of course, we mentioned before, Bill Gothard.
Yeah, his day's coming.
Close to his teaching as well, Institute and Basic Life Principles, as it's called now.
Yes.
What was the effect of Gothard as well?
Oh, what a little sneaky devil he's been. So in my childhood, I watched the fruit of his movement before I knew what it was. For a good 10 years, I watched this conservative movement rise in the midst of our church. And the only way I could tell that they were different is that they were having a lot of children They were dressing like Little House on the Prairie. They were deciding to homeschool when that was still very unusual. And I was attracted to it because I was trying to sleuth out, like, what is it about these people that makes them a little extra devout and a little extra Christian? And it turned out to be, a very strategic thing that was happening. Unbeknownst to me at the time, the Crusades were happening. He was having these big Bible conferences in stadiums, and people were coming to these things that they thought were non-denominational events to study the Bible and these biblical principles, and then they would return to their churches and cannibalize from within. And so by the time I was a young mom and I felt like I needed advice on how to help my baby sleep through the night, which is an important entry gate portal for women who are, sleep training is very tied to white supremacy and high control tactics. So sleep training was the thing that I needed. And I went to one of those mothers because I thought, she's like a professional. She's had like 10, 11 kids. She'll know how to do it. And she became a mentor. And then a group of women became mentors in teaching me how to follow IBLP. I was never a member of it, paid him money, but I was completely schooled underneath their acolytes. So yeah, I think that's one of the ways things can affect us and impact us without us knowing what to call it and where it comes from. And so a big part of my work is drawing those lines and saying, this is what that is. This is what you call it. This is how you heal from it. This is why it feels that way. A lot of it's naming and identification.
I suppose that's the difference maybe, is that you and I, we're both exposed to Gothard's teaching. On the other hand, I was part of that. My parents were big into the host and hostess committee, which is like the people who hosted the conferences when you would come to town. Mm-hmm. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and I went to the conferences starting when I was 13. I could not wait. You had to be 13 to start going to the conferences. I probably went 2 or 3 times, hung on his every word. And that's the thing, Bill Gothard, he was charismatic. He was funny. He was engaging. Anyone that could hold a crowd of 5, 6, 7,000 people every night for a week and then an all-day Saturday thing, he clearly had a gift, didn't he?
Yeah.
He had a gift of communication, and he was funny and engaging and he was applying the Bible to every aspect of life, child rearing and parenting. And yet he himself did not ever have children. He was never married.
I know, it's like
huge discrepancy. What about
we checked our reason at the door. It's a spell that he cast. It was our desire to have what all fundamentalists want, happy marriages, happy families. We want to be loved by God and others. We want to go to heaven. And here comes this non-threatening, non-assuming man, and we just fall right in line. And this is the thing I come up with a lot with tradwife content and related, the soft sales pitch of Christian fundamentalism is it speaks to our woundedness and our hunger for happiness, but it also lulls us into the box. Okay, I just do this and then I will have that. And it becomes this we even had if-then charts. I don't know if you remember those, but we had if-then charts for our punishments or for our rewards. If you do this, you'll get that. And so the transactional nature of it was never hidden, but it seemed attractive. And so, yeah, every time I hear a criticism that says you just didn't do it well enough or you didn't try hard enough, I laugh because those are some of the most sincere, devout, well-meaning people ever. They'll do anything. They even harm their own children in order to comply and receive the blessing. And the amount of mental gymnastics you have to go through to get to that place, that is nothing but cult control. And they got there. They didn't get there because they're evil. They got there because they were hurting and hungry. And here comes this predator.
Yeah, I was certainly damaged. I was spanked thousands and thousands of times.
Right.
So just on one level, corporal punishment, I talk about this in my book, it is a form of physical abuse, spiritual abuse, potentially even sexual abuse in some cases. And yet we were told when we were spanked, this was what Bill Gothard and James Dobson taught.
Yeah.
Spank the child until they cry, and then you'll know you have broken their will to sin, their proclivity to sin. Were you raised in that similar kind of environment?
My parents tried it to some extent. I was spanked, like a lot of people are spanked, you did something wrong, so you're going to get a spanking. I personally did not experience that kind of discipline until I was a wife, because wife discipline is also part of that picture. So, but as a child, I didn't firsthand experience it. When I had young children, and then I was listening to my mentors, they would explain having these sessions with their children where they were, switching their kids 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 times. And they would draw this strange line between You don't want to break their spirit. You break their will, but not their spirit. I could never figure that math out because for me, my will is my spirit. And I think that is how it is for most humans. Exactly. And then you're broken and then you'll do what they say, which usually is right away. You have to smile. You have to show your obedience face and you have to tell them that you love them. And sometimes you have to thank them. So the twisted mind control is right there, right in the middle of your injury. It's heinous. I think it's just awful, awful.
It really is. And now we've got Doug Wilson.
Yeah.
He's the new one. Have you come under his stuff at all? Were you exposed to Doug Wilson when you were in their church days?
Yeah, for me, he's not new. He's the greatest villain of my life. He's in my book, A Well-Trained Wife. I can't believe I'm stunned, but I am still surprised that the greatest villain of my story is stronger in power because he was always fringe and a little weird. So what a lot of people may not realize is there's this very common pipeline from the IBLP to Calvinism and Reformed doctrine, which was spreading in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it was born out of this hunger. So you might relate to this as a former Baptist. There's a lot of emphasis put on converting people, new conversions, and not a lot of emphasis on what you do after you're saved and the depth, of Christian discipleship. So here comes Calvinism and Reformed doctrine, and now you can get into the meat of theology, and you can feast, and you can live a more serious life. And, you have this tradition they trace from the Reformation to Germany, to Scotland, to America. And so you feel this lineage, and it's very power for men, which we're seeing today with Pete Hegseth calling the war in Iran that they just instigated Armageddon to the troops. We're living the vision right now. And then when the gender roles for women, are very separate. So, but it feels very zesty. It was very exciting to become reformed. And it was very exciting to be in this lifestyle where men and women are both working as teammates towards this Christian nationalist, dominionist viewpoint. And, Doug himself lives in this small town in Idaho. He doesn't seem very threatening on a national level, but he's been rising through the homeschool network, through classical conversations, through his press, all along for these 2 decades with this very, very clear ideology for political dominance. And he achieved that through Trump. The evangelicals lumped on, to Trump to get into the political gates, and they did so. And now Project 2025 and all of our administrative policies are embedded with that doctrine. Doug Wilson does have a Washington plant now, and here we are. Here we are living this part of their...
Yeah, he's come under attention recently on mainstream media because, of course, he was invited by Pete Hegseth to preach at the Pentagon just a few weeks ago as we're doing this recording now. And I did a ton of episodes on Doug Wilson several years ago, so I thought, oh, right, he's back. He's well, not back. He's never gone away.
Right.
But he's being platformed at the Pentagon, and people are going, who the hell is this guy? Who never heard of Doug Wilson. He's from Moscow, Idaho. He's a nobody. Oh, no.
Right.
Like you said, he's got Canon Press. He's got his Man Rampant podcast. He's a very prolific writer. He's very good at promoting himself. And yet he's kind of a Christian reconstructionist. He's got this homeschooling thing, classical education. He's got a seminary up there, a Bible college. He's got an empire, I call it. It's like a religious empire.
He calls it a fiefdom.
So, I platformed him. He speaks at conferences all the time. And now he's appearing at the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And, Pete Hegseth is a member of his CREC, one of his churches in Tennessee. So he's got a denomination as well.
Yeah. He has to have one of everything. Someone like him gets kicked out of everything else, so he had to go build his own. And he did. And he did it the same way that Bill Gothard did it, by being unassuming and threatening. He has this warm, affectionate grandpa shtick that he pulls out from time to time, coupled with his mean patriarch, I set things on fire shtick. He's different flavors for whatever mood he's in. I've seen him completely steal the trademark and plagiarize Mr. Rogers, of all people. So Doug's a chameleon and he does what he wants. And what he wants is Christian dominionism, and he sells it it's 200 years in the future. No, he's made huge gains in 20 years. And with Hegseth, it's going to continue. There's actually going to be a special this Sunday on, we're talking, what day is it today? It's March 3rd when we're talking. March 8th is the CNN's going to run a special on his kind of Christian nationalism. And I know to a lot of audiences, it's going to be new. but there's nothing new about this. This is a 50-year plan.
Yeah, they've been working on this a very long time.
We will be right back in a few minutes with the second half of this conversation, talking to returning guest Tia Levings, talking about her book, I Belong to Me, A Survivor's Guide to Recovery and Hope After Religious Trauma. And when we get back, we're going to get into the book. We've been talking a lot about her first book, which of course is A Well-Trained Wife, and it really sets the backstory for this discussion. But like I say, when we come back, we're going to really take a deep dive into her new book. So stay tuned for that coming up in just a few minutes. I just want to let you know what's coming up here in the next few episodes. I've had to postpone my recording with Gareth Gore. We're supposed to talk about his book Opus, but we had a bit of a scheduling conflict there, so we're going to do that in April. But I've got a couple of other really interesting interviews lined up. I've got Peter Berg from the Sons of Patriarchy podcast. We're going to go back and revisit a little bit more my stuff that I did on Doug Wilson, because, of course, if you know anything about the Sons of Patriarchy podcast, they have done a lot of stuff on Doug Wilson, the Theo Bros, all this stuff that's going on. And I felt like what's going on with, especially now with Pete Hegseth, some of the stuff, the rhetoric that's coming out of the Pentagon, very much laced with Christian nationalism. And I've mentioned this, I think, before. There is a definite connection between Pete Hegseth and Doug Wilson. Of course, if you know anything about it, we talk about it in this episode. Doug Wilson just preached at the Pentagon just a few weeks ago. And so this is a thing. Pete Hegseth is a member of Doug Wilson's, one of his denominational churches in Tennessee. And so there's some really concerning things. And of course, if you know anything about what I've done, a few years ago, I did a monster series of episodes exposing Doug Wilson, and I feel like it's time to go back and revisit that again. So I'm going to be talking with Peter coming up in a few weeks. Also, I've got a recording set with my very good friend, Dr. Terry Daniel. We're going to be talking about an article that she wrote recently about spiritual bypassing. And so this is going to be another fascinating conversation. I've had Terry on the show a few times before. I love having her on there as a guest. We always have a really good conversation. So I'm looking forward to talking to Terry about spiritual bypassing. And then also I mentioned too last time, I'm going to do a couple of chapters from my book, Not So Shiny, Not So Happy People, How Bill Gothard, Church and Family Taught Me Christianity Doesn't Work. So that's probably going to be the next episode coming out after this one. I'll do another couple of readings from the book, a couple of chapters. If you're interested in picking up a copy of that book after you hear that episode, you can find the book on Amazon. It's exclusively there on Amazon. You can buy it as a Kindle version, as a paperback version, and also as the Audible version, the one that I did, that I narrated. And I hear a lot of good feedback from people who've listened to that book on Audible. And what I've heard is really consistently, it's good to hear my own voice telling my story. So if you're interested in picking up a copy of the book, check it out on Amazon, and do me a favor. If you do grab a copy of the book, leave me a review, which helps massively with the book's rankings on Amazon. All right, let's get on back into the second half of this conversation with Tia Levings as we continue to look at her book, I Belong to Me, A Survivor's Guide to Recovery and Hope After Religious Trauma. As you can hear, I'm battling a little bit of a cold, so I didn't want to talk for too long. So I hope you enjoy part two, the second half of this conversation with my good friend, returning guest, Tia Levings.
Now, what about your new book, though? Because you're talking about, okay, it's a continuation of your first book.
Mm-hmm.
But then my question is, how did you get from sort of A to B? Because there's more to the story as well, where you got, okay, you get into a marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about in your book, you say, okay, this seemed like I got out of the marriage, which was very abusive.
Right.
But that wasn't the end of the story. There's more to it, isn't there?
It wasn't. And it's important to note that I Belong to Me is not a memoir. A Well-Trained Wife is a memoir. And that's important just in like where you'll find it in the bookstore, what the form and structure of the story is. A Well-Trained Wife was written to be an independent book. And it's the story of how I got in and out of Christian patriarchy. And the back 25% of it is how I healed. I didn't expect to write anything else about healing after that, except that I was getting all of these letters from people who were having similar experiences, parallel experiences, lots of questions. And so I Belong to Me is actually a self-help book, and it has some of my own stories in it, but it's not like A to B linear memoir. And you do, as you mentioned, I did get into another high control marriage. It was benevolent. It seemed kind. It wasn't violent. And at that, I tell the story because what's important about it is that that's very common. When you leave a cult, which I was excommunicated from a CREC church, and then I escaped my violent marriage. And when you leave that, if you haven't given yourself time to go through all of the healing stages and all of the self-repair, you are very vulnerable to other predators, to other high control groups. And it's very common to do something we call cult hopping. So you'll fall for another program again. You'll fall for another predatory system because you haven't healed like what in you finds that attractive, what in you is vulnerable to it and weak to it. And when I escaped in 2007, most of this was still being developed. The term religious trauma was just beginning to be coined. Deconstruction was brand new. And there just weren't that many therapeutic modalities to address chronic, complex PTSD versus single incident, PTSD. And they only thought of it as military trauma back then, So I Belong to Me kind of chronicles what that 10-year healing experience looked like. One of the working subheadings was how to predator-proof your life, because if you belong to yourself, you are not susceptible, or I should say like 95% not as susceptible to falling for groupthink or falling for propaganda. Your critical thinking is intact. You have a sense of self and a sense of boundaries and how to hold fluid boundaries that are resilient. All of this will help people from falling into another high control dynamic. So I had to talk about my second marriage to some extent, and which, ultimately ended in divorce, and that's in A Well-Trained Wife. That's not a spoiler, but it was very, very different situation than my first marriage, and really had a lot to do with healing what I like, what I'm compatible with, who's pulling in the same direction, all of the things that high control religions skipped when they were pairing couples together, because they were so focused on staying a virgin till you're married and having a lot of children and never getting divorced. They skipped all the rest of what makes a healthy relationship. So I had to heal that in myself before I was capable of being that. And that is all in I Belong to Me.
Do you find that this relates to trauma bonding at all? Because you were talking about you make the same decisions, same kind of person, you pick the same partner.
Yeah.
Does that relate to this area of trauma bonding, would you say?
That's a good question. I don't use that terminology, but I do describe that same dynamic, that we will appeal to things that comfort our nervous system and feel familiar. That's where we're used to navigating. And so I was very used to navigating within a high control system and within a high control relationship that made me feel very safe all the way from early childhood. And I was also in the same environment as far as like a religion, a patriarchal religion, and in a culture in the South, the American South, that supported all of the ways I had been wounded before. So it wasn't until I healed that piece of me and those parts of me that I was able to step away from it. I don't live in the same city. I don't have the same relationship. I don't have the same vulnerabilities. But that isn't something that a newly traumatized person can do. One of the things that I Belong to Me spends a lot of time in is the aftermath of shock. So when we have a trauma experience, it's very shocking to our system. And this can be like a little shock in your day-to-day life, or a shock that is like rendering you on your knees, like a loss, a grief. Our cultures blow past it and expect us to pick up and move on really quickly. In that window of time, which can last days to years, we're making decisions from a wounded place. So not tending to our aftermath of shock creates some of that trauma bonding, creates some of that bad decision making that we fall prey to. And we're like, why do I keep doing this again? Why do I keep making the same mistakes again? It's because you're in the aftermath of something else that you had to just kind of pick yourself up and carry on. England famously has their saying, keep calm and carry on. You can do that for a while. Eventually, you're going to have to deal with what happened.
It's true. Yeah, I found there's a difference between what they call little T trauma, big T trauma.
Yes, great point.
Little T traumas, things that happen daily or regular occurrences, and you don't necessarily think that it's affecting you because you can kind of weather that. It's like, oh, I got a stressful day at work or something happened. It wasn't that big a deal. Versus, you get that phone call in the middle of the night that someone's died and the loved one's passed away. It's shocking. It's sudden, hugely traumatic.
Mhm.
You find you found that's a difference between sort of little T traumas and big T traumas? And your own lived experience?
I mean, in my lived experience, certainly, I don't differentiate between them anymore because I know that my nervous system needs me to handle them the same. Now, the length of time that I ground, for example, or go through I have this like little exercise system that I go through, little steps and things that I know for my own self-care. The length of time that I might do that is different based on how severe the trauma is. But if I'm having an upsetting day, I need TLC. And that's true, even if it's very upsetting. Also, like not self-exploiting and like just feeling like I have to serve or do something visible when I need privacy. Like understanding that what I need is going to help me sustain the work long term is one way to protect in that situation. Yeah, I mean, trauma is anything that happens too fast, too soon, too much, for us to regulate. So quantifying it or comparing it to someone else's, both are not very helpful to me anymore. They were at the time for perspective or just understanding that those little T traumas tend to pile up and accumulate in ways that shape and form you. So I don't really downplay them as lesser anymore. Recovery is the same.
Yeah, I was going to say, again, on the subject of recovery, you mentioned earlier that I Belong to Me isn't necessarily like this academic book of therapeutic strategies and all that. What were some of the more helpful things that you did find, though? You say you kind of journeyed on your own.
Yeah.
To help you, get through the trauma and deal with all the religious trauma syndrome and abuse and all the horrible things that you suffered.
Yeah. I really dug in for my healing. I knew I was in this period of time where the therapeutic community was finding their way and they were newly naming what happened to me. And I wanted to trailblaze on my own behalf because I did not accept that story and that experience was going to dominate the rest of my life. It had already taken my youth and had already taken so much of my own childhood, my children's childhoods, the hopes and dreams that I had for those years. I was 35, 36 when I started like really seriously trying to heal. I didn't want it I didn't want to be having the same experiences when I'm 50 and I'm 51 now. I wanted there to be a marked improvement by the time, I got there. And so I got really kind of just angry and driven on my own behalf. So in the book, I go through all the modalities I tried. I basically promised myself I'll try anything that anybody says will help, but I will also put it through a vetting process because I didn't want another guru. I didn't want another magic formula. I didn't want any magical thinking or fundamentalist approaches. So I tried, like when EMDR was new on the scene, I tried it. It changed my life. Parts work, internal family systems has been really amazing, especially when I pair that with somatic work. Right now, polyvagal theory is being really scrutinized heavily in the scientific community, but I find certain aspects of vagal theory to be helpful in the application. I'm not interested in the scientific end of it. That's for the scientists to figure out. But there's little bits that I can take that work for me, and I don't have to like sign on for the philosophy of the rest of it. So that ability to like take what you like and leave the rest has been really important. Really being kind to the physiological animal that my body is. Like it has basic needs that we blow through all the time when we're involved in capitalism of our own bodies. So like getting enough rest, drinking enough, eating enough. Those are things that I don't always do. I don't even tell myself you need to get up and use the bathroom. Like give myself that. I'll just push through a break and skip it. And I cannot do that and be a healthy person. So sometimes it's really basic, but guess what? My blood pressure comes down and I'm able to have more bandwidth to face my problems. And I don't bite someone else's head off because I got, impatient. So, I mean, it does. They accumulate. Healing accumulates just like trauma does. You become a stronger person.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned grounding too. This is something I talked about with Rachel Bernstein. She's a therapist. I don't know if you're familiar with her work.
I love her work.
Podcast. Yeah, and I'd never heard of this before. And she was saying it's a helpful response to when you're triggered.
Yeah.
So this is another thing, being triggered. I mean, we can be triggered by anything, especially those of us that came out of fundamentalist Christianity. You hear a worship song, you see something,
True.
Someone wearing a cross around their neck could be triggered. Anything can be triggering. What is the connection with grounding? How does that work, when you're triggered?
Yeah. So I look at triggers as information now because just like you say, they're so unavoidable. They're everywhere, especially right now. And like, I cannot look at my phone. I cannot go through a day without encountering something triggering. So if it is something that is upsetting, like I'm actually having an emotional response to it, or I'm feeling that sense of overwhelm start to rise, I have to get solid really quickly, because what's happening during overwhelm is your system's getting like up here in a pheromone, you're getting frantic, your blood pressure is racing, a lot of things are spreading out and spacing out and getting, less solid. So it's actually just as simple as it sounds. I sit down on the floor. I feel the earth. I feel the ground hold me. I feel I'm safe in this moment. I feel enough calm that maybe I can think, why is that impacting me so much? Do I need absence from it? And this is important because now the inquiry process has started. Do I need absence from it? Do I need to understand what that is? Do I intellectually and cognitively reject that? This happened yesterday when I saw we're going into Easter, so it's going to be everywhere. And I saw a reel about a woman who was making a crucifixion cake, and she was making a cake with a pound cake and a snickerdoodle, and it's like celebrating the crucifixion and the resurrection. And like, it's for children. And so then I get immediately into my childhood trauma of the crucifixion and the way that impacted me as a 4-year-old, being told that I was responsible for this gory murder, that the little wrongs that I did as a 4-year-old child put Jesus on the cross. And just that all happens, like in a couple seconds time. I'm like transported in time. I'm activated. My nervous system is activated, and sitting down and reminding myself that I can't necessarily take a break from it. I don't agree with it anymore. And now I need to protect little me. And little me had every right to be scared and creeped out and grossed out by that. And just being aware of that and being careful for her. And then we step into inner parenting and how do you take care of younger you? Like, no one was there for you then, but you can be there for you now. You can validate how she's feeling and maybe impact someone else, that later in that day. Like, I'm a grandma now, so, I'm careful, making sure what my little grandchildren are exposed to, talking to their parents. Like, there's lots of ways that I do that differently than my parents did for me 40 years ago when they didn't even have those resources available. So all of that stems from grounding. That's a great example of something so simple that everybody can do anywhere you are, that can completely change your psychology and how you interact with the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can't remember who I learned this from, but when I was using the term triggering, I would use words like, oh, I was debilitated, I was blindsided, I was devastated, and she said, wait a minute, you're empowering the triggering, you're letting it destroy you, you're letting it beat you down. And she said, look at it a different way. And I think you kind of maybe alluded to this earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's something whereby you can say, okay, triggering is good if only that it, makes me realize, oh, I've got something to work on here.
Right.
I didn't think I did.
Right.
But I heard that song or I saw that cake or whatever it was. And I felt upset and emotional and angry or defensive or whatever the feeling was where I was triggered. And she said, look at it, turn it into a positive in that sense. Do you find that that's kind of a helpful aspect of it as well? Because I think you mentioned it's like a learning experience as well.
That's how I look at it. I don't want to stay in the victim mindset. I was victimized. That's absolutely true. I just don't want to spend the rest of my life there. So looking at triggers as information does two things. Number one, it does that. It allows me to see it as information, as something helpful that can help me work through and improve something instead of feeling at victim to it, like it's got all the power and I have none. So I get to flip that dynamic. But it also helps me understand that, trauma isn't the same for everyone. Somebody else could look at that cake and not feel anything, and it's nothing to them. And so as soon as I used to internalize that shame, like, what's wrong with me that I'm so upset about this and someone else isn't even bothered? Also, that's a great example of two people can come from the same environment. One person feels no trauma from it. The other person is debilitated from it. So, because it's not about the thing. It takes the power away from the thing itself and puts it back onto how it's impacting you. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters most for my little lifetime. I want to improve the way I interact with the world and who I am. And I don't want to feel on the powerless, disempowered, side of things where everyone else can use these weapons against me. I want to neutralize them. So healing that and understanding why this is impacting me is everything. But I won't get to that if I'm not willing to slow down, create space, give language to the experience. And it can be hard, like when you're just reacting or you're feeling stressed out, it can be hard to like actually go through those steps of slowing down the pace so that you can hear yourself think. And you're probably going to have to make some decisions that impact other people when you want to slow down and hear yourself think. Someone's going to have to wait. You're going to need to change your day. Something's going to change. So a lot of it is being willing to show up for yourself that way.
Yeah, we have to take care of ourselves at the end of the day.
Yeah.
No one else is necessarily going to do it.
That's right. That's right.
Hopefully we have loved ones around us that do help.
Yeah.
My girlfriend is very helpful when it comes to when I'm stressed out. She's a teacher like me. So we can have relatable stories.
I love that.
Of the day we had and the learners, how terrible they were and stressful it was and everything. And I can relate and she can relate, which does help, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, you want to have people around you to do help. Well, what about the religious aspect? Because where are you at in terms of your own spirituality? Because obviously you and I, we were both raised in fundamentalist Christianity, the Gothard, Dobson stuff. Do you find that you've kind of walked away from all that now? Or where are you at in terms of your own?
Well, walking away from it's always really hard, when you're surrounded. But I came up with this answer back when I first started talking about a well-trained wife in her promotional time. And my answer is that I'm spiritually private. And I needed to have a label. I needed to have an answer for that question. But I also wanted to explain why I did it. I didn't have any privacy as a kid. I didn't have any spiritual time to think it through. And what ended up happening was I was high pressure, as many kids are in Baptist evangelical faith, to make a very major spiritual decision for the rest of your life as a very young child. So I want to, number one, protect her and say, you should have known who you were before you made that decision. And that's how I do it. I give her that privacy. I also don't want to align with groups and labels anymore. That's like a promise I've made to myself. As soon as I put a label on it, Christian or not, spiritual or not, witchy, anything I say is aligning with a group. So it's a protective measure. Also, I'm a people pleaser and will be till the day I die. So I'm always wanting to know, does this person want to hear that I'm a Christian? Does this person want to hear that I'm an atheist? What can I say that's going to make them like me the most? And so being cognizant of that tendency in myself, I cannot give you a straight answer. However, what's happened since I started talking about that is people are like, oh, I like that. I didn't know I could have spiritual privacy. And I think it's so important because spirituality is fluid. It's movement, it's thought, it's growth, it's evolution. And you can't have that in a static environment. So in order to protect the fluidity of my spirit and allow myself to stay curious and ask questions and drift in and out of, this is interesting. That sounds interesting. What's the history of that? I have to take the walls away, of the label and say, I'm not aligning with a group anymore. I also invite people to judge me by my fruit, know me by my character. And yeah, otherwise, would it be a different answer on any different day? Because that's how fluidity works. The river is never the same 2 days in a row.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of different paths we can take after walking away from whatever that religion we grew up in, cult, whatever you want to call it. There's no one right answer. There's no wrong answer. It's nothing like that. Right. Everyone has their own journey. Well, I'm curious, who would you say the book is for? Obviously, you're talking about religious trauma survivors. Who's your sort of target audience? Who did you write the book for, as it were?
I wrote it very specifically for people who are going through the same thing that I came from. It was written as love letters to my fellow survivors, but that has really widened. I want to put it in everyone's hand who's ever touched anything high control. And the editorial feedback has all been that. Like, wow, I didn't have religious trauma, but I got so much out of this book. That is very exciting to me because I know these things are parallels, these paths are parallels, and the dynamics are. I'm actually working on the third book right now called How to Leave Anything, because we all experience this, and it doesn't have to be religious in nature to be traumatic, but the healing steps are very similar. So yes, it's both and. It was written to a very specific audience, but also is applicable much wider.
It sounds like a fantastic resource. I was going to say, so the book is called I Belong to Me. How can people find it? And the other question is, how can people find you if they want to reach out on social media? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Oh, it's so easy. So both books are available anywhere you buy books. In the UK, it's Waterstones. That will be widening soon, I think. But you can get it off Amazon and get it, you can order it through your bookstore. Anywhere you buy books. It's also Audible and Kindle Unlimited, and, it's pretty widely available. And I'm Tia Levings Writer at Tia Levings Writer on all the social platforms. So, I'm there. My DMs are always open. Yeah, I invite exchanges. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you've got a website as well. I found your site.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's lots of ways you can hold it. That's all you need to know is Tia Levings writer, and
That's right.
put it in Google and you'll come up somewhere for sure.
I made it easy. I made it streamlined. I recommend that to other writers too. Don't diversify and make it hard for people to find you.
You don't want to be hard for people to find. Listen, Tia, thank you so much for coming back. I really enjoyed catching up again.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, if you're interested, I'd love to have you come back on one of our Dismantling Doctor podcasts.
I would love that.
Yeah, so I'll DM you.
Okay.
One way or another. Somehow I can find you on social media. I've got your email.
Yes.
So I'll send you an email. We can maybe talk about some different dates. But I hope people buy the book, I Belong to Me. And thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Thank you. It was great.